the person that I always knew and loved in terms of Ryan Gorman is just a natural leader, and he's phenomenal at developing communities. And your next act seems like it's right in line with that. And I really, I appreciated where you are taking this next step. And I thought that when we look at real estate as a whole and all of us in here, one of our primary functions and values that we bring to the table is relationship building and developing communities and going out there and building a tribe, so to speak. And I don't know many people in life who do that better than Ryan. And I really appreciate where you are as a person and who you are as a person, I should say. And I thought it would be the perfect intro to bring you here. And I want to highlight one last thing that was kind of, from my perspective, one of the highlights that I saw in all the time that I've known Ryan was actually with the expose, the Newsweek expose, and really talking about like diversity, inclusion, equality in real estate. And Ryan was the only CEO to step up and actually show up when Congress called to try to ask about that. And I think it really plays a role in your next pivot in your career. And I just felt like that's something that really, I wanted to set the scene with that because I appreciate who you are in terms of putting people in front of profits. So with that said, here's Ryan Gorman.
And I do this. No. Oh, do I need a clicker? Yeah, if you set it down. I need the caffeine more than the clicker, so. Howdy, folks. Thank you. That was a very, very kind introduction. I didn't actually get to catch the whole last act, but I caught the back half of it and really enjoyed it. So that was terrific. Other than that little Dallas Cowboys comment debacle, the rest of it was really good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I don't know, I was gonna get my picture taken that day. See, I'm wearing like a colored shirt, like underneath, Sorry, I humanized this being look like a dork, right? All right. So, thank you. We'll talk a little bit. I was hoping to just do Q&A, but then I figured, I'm not the boss anymore, so maybe I should actually do some homework before I show up. So maybe you should forgive me. So I put some slides together that we'll just run through really, really quickly. But the general idea is, I published an article on Medium a couple weeks ago that Michael kindly referenced, and I'll be trying to publish more and more often. And mainly what I'm doing is two things. One, just trying to get some thoughts out there to get some reactions and feedback to hone where I want to focus, where I want to invest my time in building communities across the board, all different ways of building communities. But two, I used to get a ton of feedback all the time from all of you and your many colleagues around the country, and I loved it. I would get over 1,000 messages every single day. If we did something really sort of big, or I sent on a big note, it could be up to 3,000, which people think is unmanageable. It is, for me anyway, it was totally fine because it was a ton of feedback, so I would constantly get better, right? So I'd make a statement, I'd do a thing, I'd get hundreds of people telling me why that was such a stupid thing to do, and like why I had no idea what I was doing, and if I would just listen for a second, and isn't there anybody there who knows what they're doing, and all that stuff was actually really valuable in helping us to get better all the time. Improve our message, yes, but improve our decisions constantly. So my biggest concern when I was stepping away from that was not being able to get that sort of constant feedback, being able to reach out to people and having them react to things. So that's part of why I'm publishing is I have some ideas that are not very traditional, which I've had lots of conversations with legislators and consultants and advisors and all kinds of other folks who say like, yeah, I think that would work. I don't know why it wouldn't work. But I don't have like a team of lawyers to go figure out if it can work anymore. So I got to get feedback from the general public and figure out whether or not it can move some of those things forward. Largely on the housing affordability front, some things on transportation, but also be publishing on leadership and some other things. So I figured maybe what I bring is just a few of the first comments that I'll make, and it seemed to fit with the theme of Rise of the Rookies. So a lot of the comments that were just made up here kind of fit with this. So it was a funny thing, right? Like you get canned, and then everyone reaches out to ask for career advice. I thought it was like, really, I thought it was hilariously ironic. I think it's really because people were like, well, I figure you have time now to talk to me. And it's true, I actually did have like lots of days in a row of not getting fired. Like most days I didn't get fired, right? So on the whole, maybe I am somebody who could give some career advice. So I thought I'd give a little bit. These are the most common things that I've told people over the years who've reached out, especially new. But then, you ever get advice to somebody who's new to the business and you realize, like, I should probably be doing this too, right? Like you say it, it's like, oh, is that how you get all your business? No, I I haven't done that in years. Like, I should probably actually go and do that. So I figured the advice I give to newbies is maybe useful for other people too. This fits perfectly with the last group. Like, be the most helpful person you know. Like, truly, I won't call people out here, but there's people in this room who, they better be the most helpful person they know, or I don't know what circles they're traveling in, because they're among the most helpful people I've ever met. But there was sort of a theme with the rookies who were up here of just trying to be helpful every single day, constantly reaching out to people. I like the responsiveness comment. I also think that responsiveness is often confused with competence, right? So, I mean that. Like, if you're just like super responsive, even if maybe you don't have 1,000 transactions under your belt yet, but you can be super, super, super responsive and leverage the entire network, right? So when I think of being the most helpful person you know, how many of you have made a referral out of market in the past year? Can you keep your hands up for a second? Keep your hand up if you know the market to which you referred really, really well. Almost nobody, right? So you're being incredibly helpful by leveraging the network. You don't have to know that market. You may not have even known really well the agent to whom you referred, but hopefully you did a little bit of homework, maybe spoke to a manager in that area or someone else who said like, no, this person, I trust them with my life, really great. You're being really helpful in subjects that you don't know. So if you're truly a rookie, like I've talked to so many folks who just got licensed and they tell me about how they're, I've got my CRM going, I've got my website up, and I've made like lots of changes. I'm all over Instagram, I'm on TikTok. I heard of like GroupMe, so I set that up, and it's like, that's cool. Does that guy over there know that you're an agent? Like the guy like 10 feet away in Starbucks, like, does he know you're, well no, but I don't know him. Well, let's fix that. Let's walk over there and start talking to him. Does everyone you know that you're an agent? Does everybody understand how helpful you can be? And there's a whole lot of people, now many of you are naturally humble individuals. Maybe it doesn't seem like it because we're in sales, right? So you have to be kind of out there bragging about yourself all the time, even though you're really thinking like, I can't believe I know anything. Like you said, you can't believe you have 6 people who actually want to work with you, 7 now there's a new licensee. That's kind of a little bit of how a lot of people are. And yet, you have access to literally 100,000 real estate experts around the country or around the world. You can tap into that network constantly. So what I often tell newbies who are really kind of insecure about even showing up at the first appointment, even like, what if I accidentally get a client? They're like terrified, like then they'll probably know that I don't know anything. Well, you've got friends all over the place. Ask some agents in your office, ask your managers, ask others to be able to partner with you on things. What if you're a really successful agent, but you have not worked in a certain market or in a certain product type? You haven't done, there's 4 townhomes that are going up and you would love to pitch it because you're so excited about it, but you've never done new development before, so clearly you're not going to. You know who does new development? People who never did new development until they did new development, right? So you could actually find some of those folks and connect with them, learn that, bring them maybe to the party. We had the security guard in our office back in Mount Laurel, so let's go back like 15, 16 years. He was the overnight security guard. There's only one person in the office back then other than him, and it was me every single night. So my oldest daughter, my wife used to bring her to the office, and sometime around 7 or 8 at night, we'd do dinner, we'd do a puzzle, and then she would take her home. And then I would stay usually until like 1 or 2 in the morning, which I do not recommend to anybody, but like I had an affliction, and that's kind of what I did every day. Overnight security guard, he'd wander around. Now, if you're an overnight security guard, like you are so intensely bored. So he used to pop by my desk and ask me questions, and I'd say, well, we are real. This is when I was in the title insurance business. I wasn't in the brokerage side. I mentioned to him, like, why don't you just like think about getting your license? Like, seems so helpful. You're, connected. He didn't know anybody who was an agent. I kind of encouraged him. We connected him with someone who was actually a Century 21 office down in Mount Laurel. Then he got licensed. He was all excited, and he was like, but I don't know what I'm doing. So I came. Well, you have a manager, right? Yes. Why don't you bring them? A few months later, I was selling my property down there, and I know this isn't how you should necessarily select a realtor, but I said, you're gonna come, you're gonna pitch me, you're gonna bring your manager, and like, we'll see if you get the business. He would have had to face plant pretty hard to not get my listing at that time. Now, it was a really, really hot market. This was like 2004, 2005. So anyway, he came humbly with his manager. He ended up getting my listing. That listing led to lots of other listings. He was only exclusively getting listings in Camden, New Jersey. I don't know if you spent much time in Camden, but the average sales price is actually quite low. Mount Laurel is a lot higher. He was trying to break into that territory. He was able to do it that way, and he did it with his manager, right? So he did it by being friendly and helpful to me. He did it by bringing his manager, learning to grow. So anyway, I think being the most helpful person you know, many people I think are helpful in exchange, sort of quid pro quo helpful. I think the comment on not trying to participate in business or in a board or a community activity solely because you're getting business, I think people do see through that. If you're helpful for the sake of being helpful, I really do think it's going to repay 1,000-fold. Care more about doing your job than keeping your job. I used to say this even before it was poignant. for me. So I do truly believe everyone should care more deeply about doing their job than keeping your job. I used to hire this way. I used to tell people who were interviewing people who we were hiring, Marie's probably heard me say this before, that the person you're interviewing, make sure you think they're going to care more about doing than keeping their job. I want people to act like trust fund babies, not spoiled, but rather saying, like, if this is the right thing to do, I'm going to do it no matter what, no matter how it negatively impacts my career. You can be intransigent with things like that, but for the most part, that's really what I wanted. And for each of you, when you're working with your clients, that's the truth. If you want to maintain a reputation for ethics and integrity, how long have you been in business? 40 years. You know what it takes to maintain a reputation like his for 40 years? That means always, every single time, with every single client, in every single circumstance, doing the right thing, even though you might lose the client, lose the deal, potentially lose even more than that. You're always doing the right thing. For me personally, I say always willing to walk away. There's sort of a weird expression in the deal world that said never get pregnant. So when I used to, I know, you shouldn't really use that term, but there's some logic to it. When I was doing deals, I've done over 200 acquisitions and a bunch of different divestitures and other things like that. I was never, ever, ever, right up until the absolute moment of signing, so quote unquote pregnant with the deal that I could not walk away, that something couldn't be discovered that would keep me from walking away. And it's very, very unusual, I've got to say. So for the most part, when you invest so much time in something, almost anything can come up at the last minute, and you're willing to sort of overlook it. You're willing to sort of look through it. You've seen this all the time with your clients, right? It's like, well, I know the house is not in the neighborhood that we wanted, and it doesn't have sidewalks, and we wanted sidewalks, and it doesn't have the open kitchen that we wanted, and then you get to the very end, it's like, well, I guess it does have toxic mold, it does have a buckling foundation. Now that's a real live example from when I purchased my first single family home in 2004 after selling my condo with the agent who we just mentioned. We literally had toxic mold, buckled foundation, the attic was falling down, and we're like, well, we plan on doing some renovation anyway. So we looked through all that and closed. My wife still doesn't forgive me. That was 16 years ago. So I do think if you really truly focus on every single moment of every single day of doing the right thing, and you care more about that than any one transaction, that reputation will grow. One thing about building a 40 reputation is it does not happen overnight, and you can't tell people how ethical you are. You have to show them how ethical you are. In fact, you walk around talking about how ethical you are, might not be. Okay, so run to, not away. So a lot of people reached out to me a few months ago from all over the spectrum, actually. A lot of people outside of the industry, they saw that I was making a change, and they were wondering about something that they were contemplating themselves. They were thinking about making a change. They broke down into two areas. One, they were afraid of something. They wanted to make the change, but they were afraid of change itself. Uncertainty, not sure where the economy is going. They need to support their family, and they didn't want to make too big of a change. Totally makes sense. There's another category that hated where they were. They were very, very unhappy. And so they were calling me about this position, or I think I can get into this thing. These people called me, and it's like, you seem so unexcited about the thing to which you're going. You're just so done with the place where you are. And I really think you're going to make a terrible mistake. Now, there's two qualifiers for this. One is ethics. If there's something going on that is unethical where you are, then like, okay, get out. If there's also like emotional distress where you are, okay, get out. But for the most part, you should be running to something. You should wait until you're excited about something. You should recognize when you're contemplating something else that you might be contemplating it because you're pretty unhappy in what you're doing right now. Now, as we think about people who are transacting in different areas, how many people have, I'm not even asking people to raise their hands, right? But so I run into tons of people in this business who pitch me on their idea about some software that they're getting into, or sort of new programs they're getting into, or they're going to be getting into coaching. Now, sometimes it's because they're excellent at what they do, or they've got a really great idea. Oftentimes, they're tired of sales and clients, and they don't want to work very hard anymore, so they want to get into coaching, right? Like, that would be the worst coach ever, and yet, half of the coaching population is populated people who don't want to work weekends anymore, so they decided to go ahead and get into coaching. That, to me, that's terrible, that's distressing. It's people running away from something as opposed to something. So whether it's a client, an opportunity to shift in your business, or a new market, I really think if you're excited to run to something, awesome. If you're justifying running to something, maybe a little more introspection as to where you are right now, why you're unhappy, maybe fixing that would be good. Last piece of advice that I oftentimes give folks, especially when they're new to any business, real estate, anything else, is oftentimes college graduates, is you have such an incredible perspective. You're standing on a mountaintop and you can see everything if you pick your head up. I used to watch I've done a bunch of different things, investment banking and private equity, even like auditing. there are these people who they show up, they put their head down, they do the work, and they kind of expect the world to reward them for doing really good quality work. That would be delightful. That's not the way the world works, right? It's the people who kind of have their head up, they're looking around, they're intellectually curious, they're asking questions, they're trying to find ways to be helpful. They're asking people like, what do you do? What motivates you? How do you do it? Oh, can you tell me more about that? I've never encountered that kind of business before. I'd love to understand it better. Oh, you come from a family so different from mine, an area so different from mine. You're motivated by things that are different than what motivates me. I'd love to learn more. I genuinely want to ask questions that you want to give answers to, and I want to sit here and listen to the answer. Now, listening is pretty key. When you're listening, you listen for two things. You can listen so you know when their tone changes and they might stop speaking, so you can say what you've really been waiting to say, right? That's how most people actually do listening. Or you can truly listen and absorb what they're saying, appreciate it, reflect back that appreciation, and have an actual communication and dialogue with them. You ever have a conversation with someone who actually does that? You're like, that was like therapy. That was amazing. I so appreciate the conversation that I just had, and I learned so much more by doing that, as opposed to the person who you're saying the words and you're watching their mouth start to form a word to respond because they just use whatever you say as ammunition to respond back to you. That's frustrating, and nobody likes that kind of conversation. But when you really truly listen, you look around, you learn, you're intellectually curious, and you'll become the most interesting person anyone knows. Maybe not because you want to reflect back, maybe not because you want to regurgitate everything you ever learned, but because you say things like, oh, that's a phenomenal point. You know, I can introduce you to John, who knows even more about that. We were just talking about that the other day. Oh, that'd be fantastic. Actually, you know, Marie's an expert on that. I'd love to connect you with her. She had a similar instinct, and I learned from her. You know, Amy was just talking about that the other day. I'd love to connect you too. And it's flattering. It's flattering to be connected with someone saying, I was just bragging about you, and I'd love to introduce you to this person. That's absolutely fantastic. You become that connector, that fabric of the community that really in real estate is pretty phenomenal. So a couple of leadership lessons I figured I'd throw in some story time as well that might be useful. Some of the things I'll end up writing about over time. I forget what this one is. Oh yeah, so one was expectation setting. So there's two examples I give on expectation setting. One is American Home Shield, our warranty partner. When they used to get calls on, you guys may have heard me say this before, I say it all the time, on hot water heaters, people would be incredibly frustrated, and no surprise why, right? It's almost impossible to fix a hot water heater. Usually it's a problem that you have to actually replace the heater itself. Many of you know that all too well. But it's frustrating because it's a 2-truck trip, right? So there's not people driving around with like 40 hot water heaters in the back of their truck to just show up and say, I'm just curious what you might need. I've got it all right here. So they always have to diagnose, go back, and replace. So it's always a 2-trip call, and it's late in the afternoon, and they don't come back the same day, and it's your hot water, right? So you are miserable, right? If you do not have a hot shower. If you're like me anyway, you do not have a hot shower, you're pretty miserable. So what they did was started as soon as somebody made a call about a hot water heater, they would have a script that would be the response, and they would send an email to them that would say, most hot water heater issues are fatal to the hot water heater, and it actually needs to be replaced. Typically, that is 2 trips, one for diagnosis and one for installation. Just so you know, you may want to make arrangements for where you can shower tonight or tomorrow if that's important to you. That's all they did. The actual installation time went down, meaning it took longer for them to actually respond and actually install. The NPS scores shot through the roof. So when they would ask people whether or not they'd recommend American Home Shield, they actually went way, way, way up because of expectation setting. I love that story. The second story, I would go around the country, this is going back, I don't know, maybe 2018. We did these expos all over the country right before COVID kind of shifted like the way the whole world worked. We did education expos and wealth expos all over the place. We'd have hundreds of people together all over the country, and I would fly every single day to a different area, usually do at least one group, if not 2, sometimes 3 if I was really lucky in a certain week. And I would talk to them about where we're going with our product strategy. We had 138, so I'm told, every time I say the numbers, someone corrects me and say it was actually higher, but so I think it was 138 agent-facing tools at the time. And I would get up there and I'd say that, and I'd show this like bewildering array on the screen, and I'd say, we're going to get rid of all that, we're going to replace that with a dozen tools that really matter for the moments that matter, and they're going to be well integrated and seamless, and it's going to actually deliver on our promise. And every single time it would be a standing ovation. People were just like so excited. I mean, in my memory, it was a standing ovation. I don't even know what happened, but people would be so excited. And I'd say, that's awesome. Remember the joy you feel in this moment about the excitement for living in the future that we just outlined, because we're going to have to walk through the valley of despair when I eliminate 100+ tools that you currently have access to today, including the one that you're thinking, there's no way he's going to cut this one because it's the best thing since sliced bread. Everyone who has any sense about them knows that. They all agree with me. This one's not going away. I'm going to kill that thing. Whatever it is, I'm going to kill it. dead. And I'm going to give you like very little notice. You're going to be very, very frustrated. But understand that I'm trying to deliver on the promised land. So hold on to this applause and remind yourself of the feeling you have right now when you lose access to the tool or you have to learn a new thing at an inappropriate time when you're really busy and you really want to learn a new thing. And that helped tremendously, and that reflected back to me oftentimes when people would later on tell me about, well, I had that day, the day you told me it was coming, when you killed the thing, which by the way is still incredibly stupid. I cannot believe you did that. Quite a moron. Anyway, it went away, and I thought, well, he told me he was probably going to be a moron. I probably hate him, so I do, but I feel better knowing that I knew this was going to happen. So there you go. I get that comment all the time. One final one. The story that I'm wearing a vest today because like it's nice outside, but I am always cold. So I've been anemic my entire life, and then I went vegetarian and it got even worse. So I'm just always cold. I'm a delicate flower. And I used to wear a blazer all the time because I was in different professions where it was probably appropriate to wear a blazer, and I didn't really want to think too much because I'm also extremely lazy. So I just kind of wore the same thing all the time. So we went here in this building to a casual dress code. I pushed so hard for us to go to a casual dress code years and years ago because I just thought, like, one, we wanted to be able to hire and retain people who didn't really feel like dressing up, and two, we had a lot of lower wage employees in the building for whom it was a genuine hardship to have to invest in the kind of clothing they felt most comfortable and didn't feel like it was standing out too much to be able to fit into the building. So we finally went to a casual dress code. And I noticed that the whole building went casual except for the people on my floor, which was mostly like finance department. There's some technology folks as well. So I just wrote it off to that, like, oh, finance, you know, those banker nerds, they always kind of like want to dress up, right? And so I was sitting in a meeting one day, and it was mostly the sort of newer employees, younger group, exactly the folks who I thought would really embrace the casual platform. And they were all wearing non-casual clothing. Not everybody was wearing a blazer, some people were wearing sweaters. And I said, can I just ask you guys, like, why don't you go casual? And they looked at me like I was an idiot. And they said, you're not casual. I was like, oh my God, I'm just cold. But because I was the boss, I was inadvertently sending these signals to them about, like, I know there's the policy, but anyone who really wants to look the part, or, oh, that is, I was genuinely flummoxed. I went home and told my wife, she's like, duh. What? Like, you knew this? Like, no, I don't go to work with you, moron, but like, I would have told you that. I'd be like, well, okay, well, that's not helpful in retrospect. So the next day, I went in wearing the most, I looked ridiculous, but I wore like sneakers. I don't have cool clothing. Like, I'm not a cool person, but I wore sneakers. Now sneakers were cool, like these kind of things. I don't know if they're cool, but these are like what people wear now. I just had like running shoes, right? So like I wore those, and I wore jeans that were kind of like basically mom jeans, but it's all I had, right? And I wore a vest on top of a polo shirt. So it looked kind of ridiculous, but it was very conspicuous. And then every day for several days in a row, I wasn't in the office that much, but for several days in a row when I kind of dressed like that, and the floor turned over to people dressing more casually. Now later on, people then started wearing vests, which was not my intention. It was just because I was trying to not wear a blazer, and the whole vest became like a whole thing. But it's just something that I remind myself of constantly, because you can say whatever you want, but what you do is really what people are absorbing every single moment of every single day. Whether you're in a leadership position, you aspire to be a leadership position. We all lead every single day, and that was, I thought, an example worth sharing. I don't know what else I have. So I'm going to share a couple of things in some articles here coming up. I'll share two of them here, because there's stuff I really care about. So building community, the concept of building community resonates with me a whole lot, but it's not just literally building communities. Yes, we're going to be doing that. I've been building commercial to stay away from conflicting with some of the residential that we've been doing, but I'm going to be building on the residential side too. Mostly affordable, either market rate affordable or subsidized in many cases, but building community is something that I felt like we were doing here every single day throughout Coldwell Banker, on a small scale, on a large scale, in individual offices, just in the car itself with the 3 or 4 people we're driving around with, the other brokers who help you out by helping you to price a property. That helps to build community. It can happen in an instant, it can be destroyed as quickly. One of the examples that I think of when I think of building community in an instant, I'll give you two. One, you ever been in an elevator and there's like 3 or 4 other people, you don't know them, and of course you're following elevator protocol, it's like, Right? Like they're not talking. Now there's like a commercial making fun of people who talk in elevators, State Farm or something, or whatever it is. But I'm always that guy. It's like talking to me, like, hey, how's it going? I'm facing the wrong direction and thought it was cool. The commercial tells me I'm not. But anyway, you're in an elevator and it like jerks. And like everyone reacts, right? You kind of like laugh a little bit. There's a little nervous laughter. It's like, oh, you know, but you just experience something all at the same time. Like the 4 or 5 of you who didn't know one another, you experience something at the same time. Someone makes a comment, someone tries to relax the other person, someone says, oh, that happened the other day, don't worry, it was fine. You know, well, if we get trapped in here, I've got power bars in my bag, don't worry, everyone. Oh, that's very funny. If you had said that 5 minutes ago, you would have been so weird. But we all just had this experience together where we all like felt that at the same time. And then people, floor comes and someone gets off, and you're like, bye, have a nice day. Like you're like college roommates, right? Because you just had that experience together. You just had that moment, an instant, where you had a common experience and you created a sense of community. And that's how quickly it can happen. The other example I'll give is we were in Camden, actually all relatively back to Camden, I guess for me. And we were at the Walter Rand Transportation Center, which are the buses and the light rail come. And I think you spent a lot of time in Camden. I was there with my kid, two of my kids. Miles, the kid who I was at the time, and the other one was inside, was talking to someone who ended up being someone who was unhoused at the time and was sitting on a bench, and they were chatting, and then I got a call. I walked away for a while. I come back, and we go to get on the light rail. I mean, I was probably 90 seconds I was on call, maybe longer. I mean, I always estimate low for how long I was on call. My family tells me it was a lot longer, so I don't know what it was. Anyway, Miles was probably 7 years older at the time, maybe 6 years old. And we go to get on the rail, and the guy on the bench says, see you later, Miles. Tell Harper, my youngest daughter, I said hello, and don't worry, she'll get over going to school. She was a little nervous at the time. Miles must have told her that story. He's like, see you later, Bill. It was great to see you. And we get on. I was like, that was you're fast friends, the two of you, and it only happened in that like 90-second span. And then as we got on, Miles had asked me, he said like, well, what other trains come? And I said, well, this station is just the light rail, because at the time the Paco high speed line wasn't running. And I said, well, but when's his train coming? Like, no, dude, he's I don't know where he lives, but like today, that's where he's spending the day. That's where he's sleeping. And I had to explain that some people just don't have houses. And it was this profound realization for Miles. It was like, Miles is like a pretty smart kid. Like, it just all like crashed down. Like, well, we need to fix that, right? And that comes back to me all the time as I'm thinking about what I'm going to be doing next, including when it comes to promoting accessory dwelling units or granny flats. These are illegal in most of New Jersey. Virtually no jurisdictions really, as of right, allow you to put in accessory dwelling units. You can't even finish basements and attics in many places. That's changing. It's evolving over time. In California, Oregon, Washington, the city of Minneapolis, and a few other places, they're doing these as of right building, right? Which basically means as long as you're not doing too much lot coverage, you otherwise comply. You can add an accessory dwelling unit. So convert a basement into an apartment. You can add a granny flat in the backyard, that kind of thing. This is naturally affordable housing. So you can actually have affordable housing restrictions on it, but it's naturally affordable housing. Oftentimes a studio, and it means in a neighborhood that otherwise is incredibly unaffordable. Maybe there are some apartments that were done 40, 50 years ago, before the single-family rules actually came into play, that still have apartments. I used to live in a neighborhood like that in Cherry Hill, where ADUs are illegal, but in the 40s, 50s, 60s, they were not, right? Because it was just sort of the way people lived, and if you had space, you could let people rent it from you before the single-family rules were put into place, which were mainly put into place for racist reasons, but the officials in pretty much every town don't really remember that. But the ADU now can be a market rate re-entry to allowing neighborhoods to become more affordable, more accessible, more attainable. Over time, a lot of people build credits to be potentially able to buy. So we're working on some of that stuff now, including here in New Jersey and other places, to allow some of these things as of right. Even if we restrict them maybe 55 plus initially, things like that. You're going to hear more about that. If you know anybody in California, it's much of what's being discussed right now. You also, California shifted to as of right duplex. So pretty much every property in the state of California that was single family is now zoned for duplex. And then, has anybody heard about the builder's remedy in California? Sorry, I'm going off on all these tangents. I don't know how many hours did I have? So, in California, there's something called builder's remedy. It's a law that was passed back in the 1960s. I just find this to be fascinating, maybe you will as well. It was not used for anything. It was used one time. Someone tried to sue on it, and they lost since the 1960s. But it basically said if the town doesn't file essentially housing element plan, which basically a plan for how they're going to create the amount of affordable housing that they believe they need based on the population, if they fail to file it, then builders can build anything that otherwise complies with environmental regulations. Anything. Right? Which no one did, right? But now the governor, everybody else in California, they realize housing is unaffordable. In many cases, California is not recently unaffordable. California like invented unaffordable, right? And it's gotten like completely out of control. So anyway, people started using the builder's remedy. I think it was Santa Monica, maybe, if someone could correct me if they saw the story. I think in Santa Monica, they rejected a fourplex, and now they have 2,000 units that were approved within 2 weeks of their rejecting of the fourplex, because someone dug up, it was a professor who originally saw it, dug this rule up and said, wait a second, I'm pretty sure if you deny me, I can do whatever I damn well please. So now everyone's panicked. There's hundreds of jurisdictions all around the state that realize that they're totally out of compliance, and people are approving thousands and thousands and thousands of units. Like, think about literally like, well, okay, we're gonna put 400 units where that house is, right? That's the kind of stuff that's getting approved in California, which I love, people hate, and it's gonna be a fight, just litigation. It's California, so they also have litigation. And I don't know where it will settle out, but eventually towns are going to get serious about what they're actually allowing for affordable. I have this concept that I'm going to float in an article here soon, which is basically like towns. You can put deed restrictions for affordability when you have a new development that's affordable. You can do that, but imagine if you could actually pay individual homeowners in an area to make their property affordable, right? You can kind of do this with multifamily. Some people have done it where you paid a developer, or you purchased a whole multifamily complex and you deed restricted it to affordable. But imagine if you could go to actual, like, let's say you have a client who doesn't want to move right now but needs money, right? So you reverse mortgage, you look into something like TrueHold, which is like a sale leaseback company that's growing. There are some good options. But if you need money, you don't want to sell, and you don't want to do a reverse mortgage, there's not very many options. Imagine if a town that's woefully short on their affordable housing requirements could go to them and say, hey, your house is worth $500,000. If you deed restrict it so that it can never be bought by someone or leased by someone who makes more than, say, 120% AMI, 120% of the area median income, then I'll give you $150,000. The town, I'll give you $150,000. Now, why would they do that? Because for them to build affordable housing probably costs $400,000 or $500,000 or $600,000, depending on the market you're in. In LA now it's over $1 million per unit. So this is actually a cheap way to afford it. And I'll give you a life estate. You can stay there until you die. But when it turns over, it needs to go affordable. Now suddenly you've got these homes sprinkled throughout neighborhoods that are actually deed restricted to affordable, and you gave somebody some financial benefit. If you're a town that says, I don't have money to do that, say, well, what if you just gave them a break on their property taxes? What if you actually said you don't have to pay any property taxes? If you're 55 and above, you gotta have some kind of qualifier. People, generally speaking, approve things that are 55 and above more easily than they approve other things. And also, we don't live forever. So if you actually said to someone, if you're 55 or above, 65 or above, 75 or above, we'll just give you a complete break on your property taxes. 0 property taxes for the rest of the time that you physically live in that place until you sell it, move out, or die, if you deed restrict your property. Now, they might say like, oh, I want to give it to my kids, whatever. Maybe they don't like their kids, maybe they don't have kids, but you actually create affordability all over the market as opposed to concentrating in one individual area. Typically, where affordable housing comes in today is wherever the town can get away with, if they lost in litigation, wherever they can get away with shoving it. And generally speaking, that can be areas that are environmentally challenged. It can be challenged from a transportation perspective. The housing is affordable, but you need a car to live there, so how affordable is that? I don't have a car, but I have access to my wife's car, like I did today when I was bringing a box of crap. Oh, I gotta tell you about that too. So anyway, these are some of the things some of the ideas that I'll be floating. And we're probably long on time, so I probably won't do this one, but I'll just float it very briefly. If anyone's familiar with Columbia Turnpike, like the Livingston Mall. Who drove past the Livingston Mall? You drove past the Livingston Mall to get here today, right? Yeah. So the mall itself, where am I? Here's the mall, right? Which I desperately want to redevelop. I'm not really going to do it, but well, maybe I will. I don't know, but it should definitely be redeveloped. There's you have a hospital and some private schools. But look right here. This is actually high tension power lines, which we have a bunch of high tension power lines, and you know what it's like to sell a property that backs up the high tension power lines, right? Everyone loves that view. right? And it doesn't, actually, looking at the research, it doesn't actually cause cancer, but convince anyone of that, right? So anyway, I want to make linear trails. This is another little offshoot of mine. I want to make linear trails in our high tension power lines. I've seen this done in a few different places throughout the country. And linear park or trails, meaning like bike trails and linear park that runs throughout the entire right of way. Because generally speaking, it's a cleared area. Generally speaking, it connects other areas. As someone who tries to get around all of Morris County and some other counties on a bicycle all the time, I can tell you this is not built for bicycling. It's not built for pedestrians. It's not built for active transit where you're actually walking to get somewhere. But we have a lot of high tension power lines that actually come through Madison and Chatham and go all the way out to New Hope. So this particular line goes all the way to New Hope. Imagine selling property in any of the towns that's along, right? It's like living by the High Line to say, like, you can actually ride your bike to New Hope, which you will never do, but it will sell this house, right? Like, and you will actually put it in the property description, and people will love it, and they envision one day doing that. Anyway, so it's something that I want to do, so I figured I would just share it. Do we have time to do any Q&A?
Absolutely,
yeah. Okay, so that was my random assembly of stuff. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Just throw your hands up, I'll run around with the mic.
Maybe next,
Hi.
State your name.
Hi, Amy Patternay, Maplewood. Thank you so much for coming today. How
Do you know any good jazz clubs, Amy?
Yes, they do, and I was at one way too late last night.
No, it's okay.
So, but I'm happy to be here this morning. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Builder's remedy. How do you go about finding out more about this in your town without like ruffling feathers? In your town?
It's only, well, okay, if you want everyone to like you, it's never gonna work.
Well,
Like,
I've
never
already
gonna work.
relegated that, so okay.
So I was very comfortable with everyone hating me all the time. It just kept not working. But this is only California. Not this, but the builder's remedy is only in California today. So it's a state law that was passed back in the 60s. Now, like everything else, now that it's being used, legislatures around the country are sort of looking at that and saying, I wonder if we can use that. We don't have quite the problem they have in California with rejection of this. Like when they originally passed the state law saying that transit-oriented development was, as a right, approved up to 10 units, and duplexes were approved, and fourplexes were approved in certain circumstances. There was a town in Atherton. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Atherton. It's a very high-end town. I used to live not too far from it. The town of Atherton declared the entire town to be a wolf preserve, so they didn't need to qualify for that. And the next, and they lost. They were like, no, right? And then the next town over shut down their train station, so they were no longer transit-oriented development eligible. Can you imagine that? Like, shut down the train, right? I mean, it's just like bogus. But anyway, that's just California, but other states are looking at something similar.
Hold on 1 second.
Hi,
Howdy.
I'm Lucy. I'm from the Mendham office.
Howdy, Lucy.
Hi. What I find with affordable housing is that it's not affordable and it's impossible to afford it.
Afford to build it.
No. The builders struggle with it too because they could build a unit, let's say for $200,000, and then they have to. They're building, let's say, 30 units, and they have to give up 6 units for affordable housing. The qualifications make it impossible for someone to afford that unit. And I went to speak with the Lieutenant Governor, She'll always about this, and she agrees with me. Maybe because you have this great company, maybe you could look into it because.
Sure.
So let me give you an example. It's hard for someone to get deposit money down. That's neat. Let's take $108,000. If you need a couple that has to put 10% down, because they still have to go through Wells Fargo or any kind of bank for qualification. The deposits are hard, and the income is crazy, because today a couple could, let's say that a manager of a food chain and his wife, they definitely make more than $36,000. So it takes them out of the ballpark. They're trying to get their kids in a great school system and buy a condo for $200,000, but the rest of the condos, let's say, are going for $600,000. So they're thrilled to be there, but they can't afford the deposits because the deposits are still And yet the salary threshold is so low that it just takes everybody out of the ballpark.
On the core purchase side, yeah. So,
Correct.
so almost all the investment in affordable to these days, ever since really some of the law changes happened in the 70s, are on the rental rather than the for purchase side, because you don't have, you can technically use vouchers in Section 8 for some of the purchase side, but rarely do people. So the kind of thing that would bridge that gap is something that used to be available for 45 years, it was available in this country, and then the federal government sunsetted. So you really need state programs to replace it to be able to bridge the gap that you're talking about, so that someone does not need to come with a deposit, and so that a portion of the purchase can be paid by the state. Now, it might need to then be paid back upon sale, or they might cap the equity that can be grown, but those programs were starved, frankly, of funding for more than 40 years now.
I think you need to look into it.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Go to work. So truly, I love it. So those are the conversations I'm having with legislators and whatnot who don't necessarily, you can't blame them. They're passing laws on everything. They're, in environmental law one day, military budget approval the next day, et cetera. Like, they can't be experts in everything, but those are the kinds of things where those examples lead to legislation. So there's a reason why a lot of legislation is named after someone, right? Someone who died, or someone who was a hero, or someone whatever, because people aren't really thinking of it until that happens. So it can be as little as one conversation sparks something, or one example that really hits home with the politician. So if you come in like actual examples that you run into amendment, please shoot them my way. I'll use those. Thank you. Shoot.
Ryan, first of all, thanks so much for being here. It's just terrific to see you. And,
pleasure. My first event with the newly launched team, so congratulations.
Thanks so much. So I want to share, over the summer I was in Oregon with my wife, first time I've been there, and we have friends that live in Bend, Oregon. And they have ordinances there that are very restrictive.
Urban growth boundary.
Right, but they also have, I think it's something equivalent of what you're talking about with the ACU, where they created, I guess rules that allow people to build over their garage, and if you like,
as of right,
unit.
Yeah.
To me, it just seemed like such an intelligent way to address affordable housing, because it didn't change the character of the neighborhood necessarily, but it gave people access to affordable housing in an attractive.
Gentle density. So you didn't actually see any exterior change. Those are interior ADUs. You didn't see anything change in the neighborhood. There wasn't some. You didn't see. This is what everyone objects to is the parking. Parking kills all deals, by the way. Parking requirements kill every single residential proposal in the history of the world. I don't care. People blame environmental regulations. They got nothing on parking. And what you saw there was you probably didn't see like Fords on front lawns, and people having to walk 10 miles to get anywhere, right? Like they actually populated the neighborhood in a way that you barely noticed, and yet everyone who was living in those units noticed. That's awesome.
Yeah, and our friends were actually in the process of building one of these for their house. So anyway, I just thought, because I feel like affordable housing is such an incredible need in all these communities, and anyway, I just thought like.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. It's a perfect example of what we need for whether it's a town council member or someone else who's being approached with regulation. Generally speaking, they have a fear-based response, right? Of like, people are yelling at me, I don't love it when people yell at me, so even though 5 people are yelling and 500 people are silent, I'm going to assume everyone feels the way the yelling people do, and so they back down. And they hear these fears put forth of what will actually happen, instead of going on vacation somewhere that's like that. Like, you send somewhere that their kid goes to UC Davis, they come back and they want bike lanes everywhere, because like they just saw how awesome it is to ride around, and it's like, well, the weather in New Jersey is not UC Davis, but okay, fine, like whatever got you here, that's great, like now you see it. People travel to Paris and they see you can actually achieve Vision Zero, like without actually destroying the world. Or how about anybody who spent time in Hoboken, Jersey City recently that actually achieved Vision Zero? It's like absolutely incredible. They're not killing pedestrians anymore. Over 40,000 people die on our roadways every single year, and it is entirely fixable. And other places that have larger populations have a fraction of that kind of death. And you see that I don't think it's unpleasant to walk or drive around Hoboken or Jersey City anymore, yet people aren't dying anymore. So I would encourage people to actually check out some of the areas. If you know, or you're a city council member, or you're proposing something, find somewhere that actually has the thing you want, and then see if maybe you can bring people to the meeting who've been there, who enjoyed it. It's like, I always joke that whenever we go on vacation somewhere that has these like adorable downtowns and we love it, it's illegal to ever create any place that you love. You cannot go back and do that anymore because, oh, this is mixed use, that's impossible. You need 47 parking spaces for your little print shop, you're open on the corner, you want to bake cookies, oh my God, the regulations. And we make it difficult on ourselves, but if we travel to somewhere that has it, then maybe we can actually envision. I think a great example, I appreciate that. And Ben's awesome. And we have an office in Bend called Banker Realty, owns massive office in Bend, number one in the market. Who is next?
Ryan, Jonathan Keats, the home
Howdy.
office, great to see you.
Okay.
Given the shortage of residential and the abundance of commercial and other properties, you touched on in the Inman article a little bit about repurposing those properties. And that Inman article, by the way, was fantastic and proud to have worked for you.
With me. I work for you, actually, so.
With you. But I'd really like to hear your thoughts on how you envision that repurposing and what you can do at any level to strive to satisfy the residential demand.
Absolutely. So repurposing is super hard, like unbelievably hard. I bought two large properties on the Charles River Greenway in Waltham, right outside of Boston. And one of them begs to be residential, but it's so hard to get that approved. Right now, I put some green tech startups in there. They're doing great things. One of them is making the fuel for jets that is actually like green, not bad on a small scale right now. So maybe they'll do some good work. But really, it's just kind of a covered land play until we can put residential onto that facility, because it's so hard to actually shift the approvals and get what we need for zoning and variances and get the entitlements to do it. On the conversion side, there's two areas that everyone's looking at right now. One is office, because we are over office, generally speaking, in central business districts. Not everywhere else. North Jersey's been over officed for 40 years. So North Jersey's had excessive suburban office space for 40 years. And yet you still see them building more office space because it's sort of like, it's not the right type and it's not in the right places, et cetera. Not the easiest thing to redevelop those. So almost all of those offices that are functionally obsolete in North Jersey, they'll be demolished. You pretty much won't be converting them. The floor plates are really deep, you don't have access to windows, you need to create giant light wells and blow apart the middle of the building to kind of convert it into residential, which you can do, and it will be environmentally friendly to do so, but the town or the state would need to lean in hard to make that possible, or the feds, but I don't see that happening. In the local jurisdiction, you basically say to them, like, we're gonna give you a permanent tax abatement or a 25-year tax abatement to convert this into residential, because you're gonna have to do so much work to make it work for residential. Usually the ceiling heights don't accommodate, the HVAC's not what you need, all that kind of stuff. Old stuff you can do. So like we'll do things over a 100-year-old building, usually the floor heights are better, it's prettier, they had to, lighting wasn't great, so they had smaller floor plates because you actually needed natural light to come in, exactly what you want for a residential. But the newer stuff built in the 60s and 70s is really hard to convert without massive subsidies. I'd love to find a way where you could. Right now it's really, really hard. What we also have way too much of is retail space, even though we're building more retail space everywhere. Guess how much retail space we have relative to, say, Britain? On a per person basis, how many multiples of what Britain has in square footage do you think? Just somebody guess. 2 times? 3 times? 5 times? 11 times. We have 11 times more. And has anybody been to the UK? Were they able to buy things? There was a lot of people just like at home, kind of naked and cold, because they can't get things. No. Yeah. So inline retail, which I abhor for the most part because you can't like walk or bike anywhere near it, and people fly in and out of those parking lots and get killed every day. But inline retail, we have massively more than we need, and of course malls like the Livingston Mall are oftentimes functionally obsolete, could be redeveloped. Some of them being redeveloped really well. Like there's some great examples of mixed-use facilities that are being put in there. But inline retail needs to be redeveloped. Unfortunately, that's also just going to be demolished. For the most part, you can't really easily convert them, and you can temporarily. So when we look at like homeless to housed, when we look at getting unsheltered people housed, we can create temporary shelter facilities, which you see done with like shipping containers and whatnot. But we can do that with retail. That's actually a good use for retail. The best example of that, though, is motels. Motels being converted to short-term housing, which the Home Key program in California is doing incredibly well. In New Jersey, a lot of the motels that would otherwise qualify have been torn down. In California, they mostly won't because environmental regulations would not have allowed them to redevelop. In New Jersey, we don't have the same regulations, so they've mostly been redeveloped, but they can be converted over to homeless to house. So conversion is super hard, but we need to actually decide that it's a priority. Every subsidy, every program we have, we're deciding it's a priority. Anybody familiar with disparate impact? Who's in the lending side of it? Yeah, so disparate impact. So in the lending side of the world, it is true elsewhere too. By the way, do I really have time or not? Like I'm just kind of rambling now. So
Honestly, like, we'll do 2 more questions.
So that's a no, I don't have time. So
I would rather hear you
one
speak.
more. one more tidbit on disparate impact. So disparate impact is the concept of looking at the results rather than the activities to determine whether or not you're having a disproportionately negative impact on any group of individuals. So in the mortgage loan space, this is where people hear about it most often, which is you actually look at a mortgage lender and you say, well, I'm going to, because you have something called HMDA data, HMDA data on loans. We don't have that on residential transactions, but we have it on the loan side. And you get that data and you say, well, am I lending to people who disproportionately are of one ethnicity, for instance, one race, for instance, and am I disproportionately not lending to people of certain races that are represented in the population, but not in my client base? So that's disparate impact. Now, if you talk to people in the lending side, they, for the most part, not everyone, hate disparate impact because it's so hard. You can try everything. You can have your materials translated into multiple languages. You can advertise in certain communities. You can set up shop in the communities that you literally want to serve. But there are other things going on in those communities that are stopping those people from actually either being aware or being eligible for some of the programs that you're offering. So lenders hate it because it's like so. They can say, I've invested millions of dollars trying to correct this, and yet still I'm getting slapped hard, fined big, for failing on the disparate impact test. That's such a stupid test. You should look at what I'm doing. You should look at my actions. You should look at what's in my heart to determine whether or not I'm doing the right thing. I say, bullshit. You should look at the results. Because if you really care about a thing, you change the thing. You don't say, but it turns out the thing's hard, and if I'm trying really hard and complaining really loudly, maybe you'll let me off the hook. We do that for stuff we don't care a whole lot about, right? Hey, make sure you wear your coat when you go to school, kids. Like, oh, I didn't wear my coat. Well, you know, we still let them go to school, right? But when they say, oh, I haven't eaten in 3 days, we're like, well, you should probably fix that. We should probably actually get some food in you because we think it's a priority for you to be nourished and for you to grow and survive and thrive. And so when I look at things like disparate impact, I love that. That's how we manage, by the way. That's how you manage a company. As much as people like complain about disparate impact, the same bankers who show up in Congress, now I want to rant. I'm sorry, but I brought gifts, so I'll make up for it. But the same people who show up to Congress and they talk about how disparate impact is ridiculous and should not, no one should be held accountable for this because it's too high a bar, they manage through disparate impact every day. You think if they have someone who's running a branch or running a market who's saying, I'm trying so hard though, and they look at them losing money, they're like, well, as long as you're trying hard, Frank. Are you trying really hard, Frank? Are you sort of stressed? Did you work this weekend, Frank? Well, then I guess it's okay. I'll just go ahead and let the stock price collapse because you seem like you're trying really hard, Frank. No, he said, Frank, you're out of here. I'm going to keep changing leaders in that market until we get it right, until we get the performance that we want, because I want the performance. I don't really care how hard you're working. I don't care how stressed you are. So they're managing their companies through a disparate impact test. But they're complaining about having to be accountable for the disparate impact test. So anyway, I'm a little off topic with that, but it pissed me off. So
Go ahead.
there's a box of stuff up here, by the way, that's like Cold Banker stuff. There's a backpack from Cold Banker Turkey. Those guys are a hoot. They're a lot of fun. There's a bunch of stuff in it. There's jackets. There's a pillow. There's some sweaters. There's some swag. Guaranteed rate affinity. Real short. I'm leaving this because I had to bring it here anyway. And I figured I would recycle it, reuse it, rather than toss it. Shoot.
So, Ryan, Steve Oliver from the Westfield West office. Thanks so much for being here. Great to see you. On the whole sustainability, I'm sure you're familiar with Mark Lurie. He's got this idea of City Toulouse, where basically it's building this city of sustainability and equitism. So I don't know if you've heard much about it, but it's something that I feel maybe ties into what you're trying to do. What are your thoughts on that?
It's difficult. So you should look it up if you haven't seen it, because it's like totally insane and yet maybe insanely awesome. I don't know. But yes, so I mentioned Real Shore. The woman who ran Real Shore was actually Mark's right hand, who's potentially helping him with that project. So it's sort of a utopian kind of vision. Not the most environmentally friendly, but we'll see how it comes together. What I think will probably happen is some ideas that are generated through that work will then maybe permeate if it's well studied and shared. So I think it's very, very cool. By the way, in the realm of small world, what was it your kid said, like, oh, my dad does like some real estate, and that led to it. Yeah. So in the realm of small world, when we first met, it turned out that your parents lived across the street from the parents of my sister-in-law's husband.
No. I went to college with your sister-in-law.
Well, oh, Pam, that's right. Because you were like, I can tell you stories, and like I got my own stories about that.
And she said to me when I became late, she reached out to me. She said, hey, my brother, works at Coldwell banker. I was like, oh, what's he doing? Oh, he's somewhere up in head office.
It's an empty suit.
Yeah, and it turns out that her husband's family lives across the street from me.
Yeah, excellent.
And I've
Small
known them a
world.
long time.
So I can beat you, and I'm wrecking your schedule, I'm sorry, but I'll beat you on this. So I went to a funeral 2 weeks ago, sat next to someone, and it's this crazy, like Geraldo Rivera, Maury Povich, sort of Jerry Springer type of situation where it's literally like 6 different families showed up calling the person who died father. I'm not kidding. That's my family I'm talking about. Like that is insane. So I sit next to someone who was our top agent in media, Cole Banker. I recognize her. She recognizes me. She's like, "What are you doing here? We're in North Carolina. This is not nearby. We're in this little tiny town in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina." And it turns out she's married to a guy who was the son of the brother of the guy who died. He used to babysit me when I was like 6 years old, which we never realized until we're just sitting there like, you look so familiar. And there's like 12 people in this town. Who are you? It turns out we were so very small world.
Malcolm said, told me to tell you he says hello.
Excellent. That's good. And I haven't talked to him in so long too. This guy always well. All right, let's talk.
Diane Colley from the Mendham office.
Howdy.
I want to ask you, what do you want us to do? What are you challenging us to do as realtors?
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. I love it. An excellent question. And sort of like to Amy's comment earlier, it's somewhat hard, right? Because, and this was true when I was in my position previously too. Like, you want to speak for yourself, but you also have clients, right? And clients may not love some of what you're proposing, right? Like you have clients who want that building to be built and clients who don't want it to be built. You want clients who want the rules to be changed and those who don't. So I understand you're in a delicate position. What you can do, and what I've found was really, really helpful, is educating with examples to what was given the folks who are making the decisions. And maybe showing up. Now, many of you show up at these town council meetings anyway because you want to be part of the community, you want to understand what's going on. But showing up and being able to give real facts when these kinds of things come up is super helpful. Because what I find is people show up with Facebook facts, right? And they say something that is completely outlandish, and sort of the gallery snickers, like, that's obviously ridiculous, but nobody says anything. Because, you're limited to 3 minutes, and what am I going to do? Send an email? I'm like, yes. Send an email, give an example, give an anecdote, help them out. Because they really don't know. Like, what I found with Congress and Senate, I used to do a lot of stuff on the Hill, and now I'm going back and doing that stuff more. They do not know. They have absolutely no idea. They have like spectacularly incorrect ideas about everything except for the world from which they came. They used to be whatever before they became into politics. They can't be experts on everything. One person showing up with a handful of facts and saying, here's some things that I found. If I can ever be helpful to you, please let me know. I get people reaching out to me all the time, stuff I have no idea about. I'm like, I don't know what you think I actually know, but like I will take your question, I'll find people who do, and I'll introduce you to them. It helps massively, and you can give facts, you can give circumstances, you give anecdotes of like, well, let me tell you about this family I could not help. Let me tell you about a family that is in a difficult position. Let me tell you about a family that wants something out of Mendham that they're not getting right now because of some of what we've done. Let me tell you about a town that I visited that we could actually bring some of those ideas back here to be able to maybe create some of this concentrated, walkable development that is not disruptive in Mendham itself, right? I mean, and Mendham, like, is a sort of only really rallies to stop at Dunkin' Donuts, but you could be the one that that puts them on the map. By the way, have you read that book yet? Between the mountain and the sky? Yeah, man, I was just like,
I know Maggie.
oh my goodness, that was like so inspiring. Except I read it, I listened to it, and I walk in the mornings. It was like 14 degrees. I'm like crying, and it's freezing to my face, and I feel like it should have come with a warning, right? But it's a beautiful book. You should read it. It's incredible. Okay. Thank you.
Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much as always. And if you guys, the one thing I'll say is, in my time working with Ryan, I don't even know how you respond as quickly as you do with everything that you have on your plate. But if you have other questions, I'm sure he'll be happy to help because that's just the type of person you are. You're a very competent person. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hey, one last thing. 27th anniversary?
27th anniversary, yeah.
Congratulations, wedding anniversary. Thank you again, Ryan. All right, what time do we got here? It is 12:30, so very clearly I'm not going to get through my presentation in time for 1 o'clock. No. Don't even, are you kidding me? I wanted to hear you guys speak. So here's my thought. We have food served, in the room behind us, and it's out there now. At 1 o'clock, you certainly can go there. what my thought is we're also recording this, and there's going to be a lot of people that are not here today. So I'm going to run through my presentation. We'll do a 5-minute break. We'll come back here at, let's just say, 12:40. And then I'll run through my presentation. If you need to get up, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Go make phone calls, like go grab food. I'm still going to run through the entire thing because we are going to record it today. And I actually think that what I'm going to bring is some value here in terms of negotiation. So hopefully that's helpful to you. I really appreciate you guys coming. This is the next session. I have some awesome speakers lined up, although I'm just confirming one of them, which is why I didn't put up who we have. So you can just sign up now if you wish to. And like I said, we'll be back here at 12:40. Thank you.